Welcome to The Savvy Sauce, where we have practical chats for intentional living. I'm your host, Laura Duggar, and I'm so glad you're here. Slumber Sleepwear invites you to experience what true rest feels like. What you wear to bed and how you feel in your pajamas is a critical part of your evening wellness routine. So sleep well, live brilliantly. Slumber Sleepwear is available online at slumbersleepwear.com. If this is your first time here, welcome. You may be wondering what it means to have a special Patreon release. So here's the scoop. Patreon was a platform we used to generate financial support for The Savvy Sauce. And we expressed our thanks to those paying patrons by giving them a bonus episode every month. But in 2024, we transitioned away from Patreon when we became a nonprofit called The Savvy Sauce Charities. The podcast is part of this nonprofit, which exists to resource loved ones to inspire growth and intimacy with God and others. So people used to pay to support us through Patreon, but now they can just donate directly to our nonprofit. We spend thousands of dollars each year to record and produce these episodes, and we do pray that they're beneficial and that God sees fit to use them to be transformational in your life. If that is the case, if you have ever benefited from an episode of The Savvy Sauce, would you consider showing your gratitude through your financial generosity? Any amount is greatly appreciated. In fact, if every listener gave only $1 per month, it would completely offset our costs. We have all the details on our website, thesavvysauce.com, but feel free to also reach out to our team anytime if you want to partner together. Our email address is info@thesavvysauce.com. My guest is the founder of Reclaimed Hope Initiative, Bettina Stevens. Here's our chat. Welcome to The Savvy Sauce, Bettina.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's just begin here. How did you originally come to faith in Christ?
Yeah, so I grew up in the church. My father has been a pastor for as long as I can remember, and probably about 25 years even before I was born. So I've always had God in my life in some way, shape, or form. But honestly, it wasn't really until I went to college that I really found my own relationship with God that didn't feel like it was something that I was taught growing up or part of just an expectation of my life kind of in my upbringing. And it was just a really beautiful time for me to really connect with him in a different way and really kind of, reconstruct and deconstruct some of the things I've learned and really create that into my own faith relationship with him.
Well, when you think back to that pivotal time in college when you're making that relationship your own with Christ, how did you anticipate your life playing out at that point?
Yeah, my husband and I were high school sweethearts. So we have been together for a very long time and were together all through college. So we kind of always planned on, getting married soon after college. We always said we'd have 4 kids, 2 biological, 2 adopted. That was always part of the plan. And then I had always wanted to become a physical therapist. So after college, I had planned to apply to physical therapy school, get my doctorate, and then really just kind of start our life together. We talked about traveling and regular time away and really just diving into, being a young married couple and just growing our family. And so, yeah, even in college, this was something we kind of actively talked about and played through in our lives. And we were just excited to get that started.
So you two are in college and you're dreaming about the future, but you already had mentioned that adoption was in the plan. So do you remember how old you were when God first laid the idea of adoption on your heart?
Yeah, so I never grew up with adoption in my life, except through the story of my birth. So my parents actually had planned to adopt a child between my brother who's older than me and my birth. And actually, that little girl was stolen from them before they were even able to bring her home. And so it was a very heartbreaking story for them, but something that God really laid on their hearts of adoption and how that would play out. And so it was just a really beautiful story of redemption for them in terms of this little girl was stolen from them on January 15th, 1985. And both of my parents really still felt like they were supposed to have another baby. And so I was actually born January 15th, 1987, like 2 years to the day, to the hour that little girl was stolen from my parents. So that was always a part of my story, always told to me in different ways. And so I don't know, I always feel like I had that adoption seed within me from a very young age. And it was just something I was always open to and curious about. And then as I got older, honestly, I've never really felt compelled to have biological children. It was never really something that I dreamed of or longed for. I talked to so many other women who were like, oh, I just always wanted to be a mom, or I always wanted to be pregnant. And that was just never my story. I was actually really nervous about being a mom, and I was really nervous about kind of what that would look like. And it was just never something I felt compelled to do. And so we talked about biological kids because I felt like that's what you do. You get married and you have biological children. But adoption was always a part of my plan, really just in feeling like there's so many children in the world who need a family, and why couldn't we do that for them? So whenever Paul and I were talking about it, even early on in our marriage, I would say for me, that seed was really planted towards the end of high school, beginning of college, where I really felt like, yes, I want to be an adoptive mother. Whatever that may look like, I don't know, but that seed was really planted deep. And then I remember being very nervous to bring it up with Paul and talk with him through that. And he was totally on board when we finally had the conversation and felt very similar. So that was just really confirming for me in our marriage and in our relationship. And it was just always part of our plan after that. So, we didn't ever really know what that would look like, but we are both very much on the same page from the beginning. And it really wasn't until our first mission trip to Uganda in 2014 that we both felt like God was telling us that it was time to pursue our first adoption.
Okay, so there are a few parts that I want to elaborate on here. So with you and Paul discussing this, you said he was on board right away. Was it something that he just was at peace with through conversation with you, or was it something that he also had felt called to before you even talked about it?
I really feel like it was something he felt called to before we even talked about it. And I'm not sure that he had really put words to it until we had the conversation, but he very much has felt that same calling of just, I don't feel like we have to have biological children. And I don't know. I remember our first conversation and feeling so much relief in that, of just like, wow, we both really feel like we are on the same page, and really realizing how unique that is, because the majority of families that we talk to, it's really the wife who kind of is more on board in terms of adoption, and the husband kind of comes around eventually. And obviously that's not everyone's story, but the majority it is. And so for us to just feel like we were on the same page and ready to take that step together was very reassuring, and just a clear calling from God for us, knowing that we were both already there together.
If this is too intrusive, you don't have to answer. But I'm also curious, when you say that this daughter, born the same day 2 years prior to your birth, when you say she was stolen from your parents, can you share that story?
Yeah, of course. So I have two older brothers before me, and then my parents both really felt called to adopt as well. And so they had done all the paperwork, gone through the entire process, and they flew to Mexico to pick up their daughter, who, they had already prayed for, like created a family around, and she was being cared for by the village doctor and his wife. And at the time, the village doctor's wife really felt like she was her daughter. And so my parents flew in, they met with the doctor, they saw their daughter. And then the next day when they were supposed to come back and sign the paperwork to be able to officially make her theirs and bring her back home, the doctor's wife had fled with her. And so, they spent the next few days really just trying to find their baby and figure out what happened. And it was just so heartbreaking because unfortunately it didn't happen and they couldn't find her. So they flew home kind of not really knowing what to do and feeling, I guess, a balance of anger and, being so heartbroken at the same time. And my mom said it really took her a year before she felt like she was able to even begin the journey of forgiveness for this woman and never realizing that they would find their baby again. And so it was just a crazy story of heartbreak for them. And during that time, my mom still really felt led to have another baby. And the funny part is she had asked my dad, I really feel led to continue growing our family. And my dad was like, no, we're good. I think we're good. We have two boys. Like, this awful thing just happened. And, why would we put ourselves through something more? And so my mom just said, can you go away for the weekend and pray? And if God tells you we're not supposed to have another baby, then I will just let that go. But if he tells you we are, then, let's continue this journey of parenthood. And so my dad went away, and he's told me so many times that he went away thinking he was just going to spend 3 days relaxing, And he said he spent about 48 hours just sleeping and hanging out, and then had this really huge conviction from God. And so started praying, and God did very much confirm that they were supposed to have another baby. But he also confirmed that it would be a girl. And my dad wrote down the day I would be born, the time, my height, my weight, my gender in a journal that he felt like God really shared with him. And I was born to those exact specifications 2 years to the day that little baby was stolen from them. So just a really beautiful story of heartbreak and redemption on the other side for them.
Oh my goodness. I've got tears in my eyes just thinking of that up and down journey for them. And when we get to hear this years later and we get to see even little bits of God working all of these things together for good, it's so encouraging to see that. But yet I'm sure living in the moment when your daughter is stolen from you and you're going through the process of forgiveness, there's just so much at that time I can see where it would have been a really difficult season. And I'm sure you were such a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And my mom says she didn't find out if it was a boy or girl intentionally because she didn't want to be sad. And my dad didn't tell her that he had all that information until after I was born.
Oh,
so it was kind of this, God secret that my dad had that he just said, we'll just wait and see. And then after the fact, so confirming for both of them.
Wow. Well, then for you specifically, has there been any scripture that God's used to provide you with comfort along the way as well?
Oh, definitely. It's funny. Paul and I say all the time that we felt very prepared for adoption going into it. We read all the books, we did all the training. And really, once we got into it, we realized how naive we were to actually understanding what it would look like, but also really just trusting God in a way that we hadn't before. And so I remember just waiting for the adoption was so hard because you get paired with these children and you're praying over them and you're looking at their pictures and you're just imagining what life with them will look like and never really knowing when you'll get to meet them. So much of that is out of your control and in the control of, the United States government, but also whatever country you may potentially be adopting from if you're doing an international adoption. And so for me, I remember just reading the Psalms over and over and over again in the waiting and just really asking God to bring me that comfort and that, that dichotomy of lament and praise in the Psalms that David does so clearly. I just remember reading them over and over and over again during the year and a half we waited to bring our boys home for the first time. And then so many scriptures since then, since bringing our boys home. But I remember the first time I read Hagar's story and realizing it's the only time in the Bible that God is called El Roi, the God who sees. And I remember being so encouraged by that, of just, he is seeing everything and knowing everything, even in the midst of so much despair or heartbreak or difficulty. And that is something I've held on to for a really long time.
And now this just makes me want to hear even more of your own adoption story with your children. So can you give us some more details about how long you and Paul were married before you got to bring home your first children, and catch us up on growing your family to this point?
Yeah. So Paul and I were married in 2009, and we didn't bring our boys home until 2015. So leading up to that point, we really were set on just having a good 5 or 6 years just being married and getting to know each other as husband and wife, and really just solidifying our relationship in a more tangible way that really felt like we were connected and kind of ready to bring children into the world and parent. We really thought we would have 2 biological children first, mainly just because that's what you do once you're married, and then we would adopt later. So that was something that was always kind of part of our planning and thought process. But we had a really beautiful time in Uganda when we went on our first mission trip there. And we worked at a school and just went with a small team to just kind of bring resources. And we did vacation Bible school and a bunch of other things. And we were just totally rocked by this trip. And it was just the most tangible encounter with God that both of us had ever had. And just such a beautiful, confirming feeling of kind of all these things that we felt like we were desiring in terms of our family. And so we both had this experience. We come home, and I just remember the first week home, we both kind of looked at each other and said, like, I feel like we're supposed to adopt now. And we are both on the same page 100%, and just a really confirming feeling. So then from there, we both really felt led to adopt from Uganda, obviously having this beautiful experience, but we had really been connected with this school since 2011. And so just really feeling like we love the people of Uganda. We love the country of Uganda. You know, we've had such beautiful times there with Jesus, and we really felt led to that. So we started the adoption process in July of 2014, and we traveled to Uganda in August of 2015. But we actually didn't bring our boys home until November of 2015. So Paul and I lived in Uganda for almost 4 months to complete the adoption process there before we could bring them home.
And then the Lord continued growing your family even after getting to have your 2 boys come home with you. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So after our boys had been home about a year, Paul and I just really felt like we were supposed to continue growing our family. And we saw a picture of this little girl on a waiting child list from China. And I just remember looking at the picture, and I said to Paul, this is our daughter. And I know that this feels so soon. We just brought the boys home. We're still adjusting to being a family of 4, but I really feel like she's our daughter. And so, you know, Paul was like, okay, I'm in. Like, let's go figure this out together. And, you know, it was just the most peaceful process from the start, because we really just asked God very boldly, if she's supposed to be our daughter, let someone donate all the money for her application. And then that would happen. Or I would say, Lord, if she's supposed to be our daughter, if we're supposed to bring her home into our family, you know, let all of these doctors that I called, that I'm waiting to call me back, let them call me back. Let one call me back today before noon. And then like all 6 called me back that morning. And it was just, the whole process was that way with her, of just this total and complete peace, and just God really reaffirming that decision time and time again, even when the majority of our friends and family thought we were kind of crazy for pursuing another adoption. And specifically, her file was very much special needs in terms of her cognitive abilities and what that would look like. And we really didn't know the severity of her needs. And so we were kind of taking a leap of faith in what her file said compared to what we felt like God was asking us to do.
But it seems so evident that God was very eager to confirm that decision and just to be gracious to you and let you know this is your daughter indeed.
Absolutely. Yes. And after bringing her home, I've never been more sure of anything. She is just such a joy and has brought so much love and peace and just healing to our family in so many ways. So it's only been confirmed, over and over again since we've brought her home.
And now a brief message from our sponsor. Ladies, it's easy over time to start looking a little frumpy in what we sleep because it's comfy. But what if I told you that you could look cute for your hubby and be super comfy for yourself? Slumber Sleepwear is your answer, and it allows you to fight the frump and look great late. And guys, this makes an amazing gift for the lady you love, whether it's her birthday or your anniversary or you're celebrating Christmas. Slumber Sleepwear is a treat for you and for her. These are truly my favorite pair of sleepwear, and I love how this set holds up after many washes, and the fabric feels like butter. It is so smooth. Slumber Sleepwear invites you to experience what true rest feels like. What you wear to bed and how you feel in your pajamas is a critical part of your evening wellness routine. So slip into Slumber's Repose collection and immediately feel luxurious in the cooling comfort of a breathable fabric made in the USA. I think it's also awesome that Slumber Sleepwear is owned and designed by women for women to fit gently in all the right places so that you can see for yourself what it feels like to rest in your best. Sleep well, live brilliantly. Slumber Sleepwear is available online at slumbersleepwear.com. And you mentioned that there were some special needs. Do you want to share anything about your children and what's unique to them?
Yeah, so with any adoption, there's a lot of trauma that comes with that. So all of these kiddos have had such a difficult upbringing, depending on how many years they've been in an institution or what experiences they've had, even pre-institution. And so that was something that we felt like we had prepared for, but was much more severe when we adopted our children than what we anticipated. And so even with our boys, we had checked that we wanted no intellectual disabilities. We were not even actually approved for a special needs adoption at the time. And we were told we were adopting 2 4-year-old boys who were quote unquote healthy. And in the adoption world, you take that as a grain of salt because you don't actually know what that all looks like or how that has played out in their lives. But when we flew to Uganda, we realized very quickly that our oldest son had pretty significant needs. So at 4, he was nonverbal, and we weren't sure if it was autism or something more of a genetic disorder or what was going on. And so it really wasn't until we brought him home that we kind of got all that confirmed. But he does have fairly significant autism and severe PTSD. In addition to ADHD, he has an autoimmune disorder called PANS, and he also has sensory processing disorder. So quite a handful of needs that we were definitely not prepared for. And really, we laugh because we checked all those boxes of no, and that's exactly what we got in our son. And so we just felt like, okay, God, like you're asking us to do this. And we checked all those no boxes, but apparently you had different plans. So it has really been a leap of faith for us to just trust God in that process because we felt totally unequipped and unprepared. And then our other son is more neurotypical, but still has quite a bit of sensory needs and trauma needs. And he has also fairly significant ADHD. And so that plays out very differently than our son with autism, but both, very high needs in general. And then our daughter has 2 very rare medical syndromes. So she has Sturge-Weber syndrome and then PPV, which stands for phacomatosis pigmentovascularis, which is highly rare. And there's only 500 documented cases internationally ever. And so her diagnoses were a territory that even the most specialized physicians were still really unsure of. And so we had a range of ideas after we talked to the doctor of her cognitive ability and what that would look like. And it was extreme. It was all the way to she could be fairly normal, all the way to she could have daily seizures and we may have to remove half of her brain. It was just this huge spectrum of medical needs that they were like, you're just going to have to wait and see. And I just remember at that moment, Paul and I looking at each other, and we both just said, like, she's already our daughter. And if God has confirmed it, he will make a way. And we really just felt peace, even in the midst of that diagnosis. And then, it's so funny. We always say we tried to adopt another child with special needs, and it didn't happen because she got home and she is brilliantly smart and, no cognitive disability at all. She's speaking, talking, walking, running, jumping. She's such a joy to have in our lives. And while she does have some medical diagnoses that we regularly have to get treated, cognitively, she's perfectly intact and no seizures to date or anything like that. So we've really been blessed by God's just fruition in her life.
Just hearing everything that maybe was shocking at first to get different diagnoses, how has this adoption journey impacted your marriage?
Yeah, Paul and I laugh because pre-adoption, we always said, we're going to be really flexible parents, the ones that let the kids nap in the car. And, we're going to, when we go on vacation, they can sleep on the beach and we're going to travel with them. And we laugh now because our son's needs, with my son with autism, he has to have such a structured and routined day. And so, we laugh that it's been very opposite of what we intended our parenting to look like. But in terms of our marriage, it's really come down to a lot less quality time, a lot more stress, and a lot of sacrificing kind of our wants and desires and even friendships to parent our children well. And we really just didn't expect the amount of trauma our children would come home with. And really, it has been a constant battle for Paul and I to stay connected and motivated to care for each other after all the care we give to our children in the day. And so, yeah, it's been something that we have to be incredibly intentional about in order to keep our marriage healthy.
And I appreciate that real response, because how do you even find the capacity to be intentional? And then what do you and Paul do to stay connected?
So lots of conversation. I will say Paul and I had a long distance relationship for about 4 years before we were married as we navigated college. And as hard as that was, I realized what a blessing it was for us to have to communicate everything we needed over the phone because we couldn't be physically present with each other. And there's so much body language that you get from just seeing somebody with your eyes, and we were not able to do that. And so much communication had to happen over the phone. And that has been such a blessing for a foundation for our marriage, because now I feel like we can actually converse really well. And we do daily, weekly check-ins around our days, logistics, schedules, emotions, routines. Like, we're very structured in terms of setting aside time to just check in with each other. And then there's a ton of vulnerability and just willingness to share the dark moments no matter where we are. So we never sugarcoat things with each other. We never try to just feel optimistic because we should be optimistic. We're really honest, even if it's really difficult to hear. And I think that has been just definitely a root for the foundation of our healthy marriage. The other thing that we do is a lot of tag teaming and gap parenting is what we call it. So we kind of say together we need to be 100% for our kids, but there's days where maybe I'm 25%. And so I need him to be the 75% and vice versa. And so we communicate that a lot of like, hey, I woke up at 50% today and I'm not sure I'm going to make it to 100. And so really just being willing to pick up the slack for one another in really intentional ways. And then, oh my gosh, so much grace for each other. And we are very intentional about praying together and just spending time together with Christ.
Just hearing that level of teamwork, I'm sure it's something that many marriages have never experienced before. So it's beautiful to hear how you both can help fill in with each other and encourage each other. And I'd also just love for you to educate us with some of the struggles that are specific to families raising children with special needs or trauma in their backgrounds.
Yeah. So adoption is unique in the fact that I tell people all the time the foundation of adoption is loss and grief and abandonment. And those three things are ingrained in our children's cellular memory before they even come home to us. So even if you adopt a child at birth, they know if they've had connection with their birth mom or not, or they know the trauma that has happened to their birth mom in utero. And that doesn't just go away because now that they have a family. And that was something that I'm not sure I quite understood until we had our children in front of us and just saw the amount of turmoil they were in trying to understand who we were, understand what a family even was, and then how to really let some of their walls down to be able to trust us. And so unlike a biological child where most of the time they're feeling the love from their mom, from the dad, from siblings, from extended family, from a child who knows they're wanted from the beginning, that is very much lost in adoption. And then on top of that, a lot of these children do have special needs due to potentially harmful things that happened in utero, or just a lack of development depending on what country they're from or where they were birthed. And so all of those things you don't really know until the child is in front of you. And I always say it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle you only have 250 pieces to, and you're just trying to fill in the gaps as you go. But for us in particular, with our son with PTSD, he is very terrified of a lot of things and has very specific triggers. And so community access is so difficult for us. Even going to church is very difficult for us. He can't attend a regular camp, and we don't do play dates, and even going to a public park or something like that is very challenging in terms of him feeling safe and knowing that something is not going to hurt him. And so it's really just taken consistent love and grace and understanding and empathy and really just showing up for them over and over and over again before they even begin to let their walls down. So many of these kids, they've been forced to be survivors. And so, chronologically, they're 10 potentially, but emotionally and developmentally, typically they're about half their age, so 5. But they have the street smarts of a 35-year-old because they've learned how to cope and how to make sure that their needs are met, however that needs to happen. And so once they're brought into a family, all of those behaviors are ingrained in them, and it takes such a long time and really so much intentionality for them to even let you take care of them. And so, yeah, that was something that we just never quite realized in terms of trauma and how that would play out in our home and just all the behaviors that would come from that. And you really, as a parent, you have to push past the behavior to realize that these kids are simply trying to communicate something to you. And so for us, we've dealt with physical aggression and verbal aggression, lots and lots of really mean things said to us. And then our other son, he dissociates. So they talk about fight, flight, or freeze. And we have one of each in our home, which makes me laugh. But you have to parent them drastically differently as a result because their survival instinct kicks in and what works for one doesn't work for another. So I have one son who fights when he's angry or scared. I have another son who freezes when he's angry or scared. And then my daughter runs. She's our flight. So she's nervous, scared whenever she is running away from us, from somebody as fast as possible, trying to protect herself. And so, we thought like, oh, we'll do X, Y, and Z as parents, and that will work for our children. And realizing very quickly that there's a very different concoction for each child that we have to utilize in order to meet the needs of their heart. And so that was just something that was very unexpected for us and has taken just a lot of education on our part to figure that out.
And I'd love to hear you unpack that a little bit further. So could you give a few helpful examples of how you parent well for someone who does retreat to fight, flight, or freeze?
Yeah, of course. So for my son who fights, typically when I see him escalating, we have to get to a safe place fairly quickly, for us as parents, for his siblings, and for himself. So a lot of adopted children who have physical aggression as part of their behaviors, they will often do self-harm as well, in addition to harming others. And so for us, we've created a very safe, what we call our safe room in our home. And so when we see him starting to escalate, we get to the safe room and I just stay present with him. I don't talk to him. I don't try to prompt him to do anything until he's calm. And we use the zones of regulation for that. So I don't know how familiar your listeners are, or you, but essentially it's colors where kids don't necessarily have to say I'm angry or I'm sad. They can just say what zone they're in. So the green zone is like happy and calm, ready to learn. They feel safe. The yellow zone is like silly, goofy, maybe a little anxious or scared. The blue zone is sad or tired, maybe just feeling lethargic for the day. And then the red zone is unsafe, angry, mad, yelling, hitting. So a lot of times I will just note, we've made a rule in our home that if either of us are in the yellow zone or red zone, we're not going to talk about it until we're both calm. And so a lot of that for my son with physical aggression is just being present with him in the room and letting him self-cope as long as he's not self-harming, to make sure that he stays safe and we stay safe. And then once he's calm, then we debrief what happened and problem solve together how we could do that differently the next time. And, sometimes that's 20 minutes and sometimes it's 3 hours. And it just totally depends on the day and his ability to regulate that day. So, that's something that we have set in place very quickly and are able to kind of manage as he gets older and larger. And then we do use the zones of regulation for all three, because I think that's incredibly helpful. Our other son who freezes, who dissociates, he kind of goes into his own world when he's feeling scared or anxious or upset. And so a lot of times for us, that's just sitting with him. He typically tries to retreat, like he'll hide under his bed or in a different space. And so we have created what we call break spaces in our home that are okay for him to sit in when he needs a break. That way we're not hiding. There's so much shame from these kids. And so that need to hide comes from that internal shame. And so we've really tried to deconstruct that with him of there's no shame in feeling emotion. And we really are here with you no matter what you're feeling or thinking. And so we have kind of 3 or 4 break spaces in the house that he can go sit in that has all sorts of sensory things he can fidget with or read or play with or draw, just to kind of get himself back to being present. And then again, we sit with him and talk through what happened and how we could do that differently, or potentially what was a trigger for him in that moment. And so very different in terms of the aggression versus the disassociation. And then my daughter is a flighter. And so we often, when she starts to get dysregulated or upset, again, we prompt her to a break space, but a lot of times we have to prompt her to her room. And then we just sit in there with her so that she can't run away from the problem, that she can't just ignore what's happening, that again, we help her regulate and calm down. And then we talk through what happened and figure out what we could do differently. But it is just so different for each of them, and how you can get to the root of their heart and their triggers is very different. And so we just have to play that by ear a lot, and lots of what we call practicing outside the moment. So for all of our kids, we practice these coping strategies when they're calm, when they're in the green zone, when we're all feeling good, so that when they get to maybe the yellow or red zone, there's more muscle memory there for them to know what to do and how to do that better.
Bettina, your intentionality in parenting is just astonishing. Have you checked out our library of articles available at thesavvysauce.com? New posts are added multiple times a month related to parenting, intimacy and marriage, personal development, habits, and other topics connected to what we discuss here on The Savvy Sauce. If you sign up to join our email list, you're also going to enjoy little extras delivered straight to your inbox. Our hope is to encourage you to have your own practical chats for intentional living. So these freebies will include things like questions that you can ask on your next date night, safe resources to read to promote enjoyment in your intimacy and marriage, or questions to ask your kids to connect at a more relational level. We hope you check out all the available reads at thesavvysauce.com under the Articles tab. I appreciate you had given us a few things to consider that we may not be aware of if we're not parenting a child who's had trauma in their past or has unique special needs. But then coming more to you and Paul's story, what are some of the unexpected challenges that have come from parenting?
Honestly, I didn't quite expect the amount of loneliness and isolation that would come in parenting children from trauma and parenting children with special needs. It's just a unique balance in trying to care for your children and trying to find time to feel like yourself again. And often in the seasons that we've had pretty intense mental health crises with our children, I've often felt like their needs always trump my own needs, which isn't healthy at the time, but I feel like that's kind of what we need to do to survive. So the things that I just never expected were, little to no sleep. We've had seasons where my boys haven't slept for 60 straight nights and not even a wink. And so we're just up with them all day, all night, managing their triggers or their emotions. The physical aggression and verbal aggression, of course, was not something I played out in my head as a parent. And having to, keep a child safe who's your baby and you care for them while also trying to protect yourself. That was something that I just never envisioned as a parent. And then a lot of it is just that feeling hopeless, in the moments of like, God, you called us here. And now we're here, and what do we do with all this difficulty in front of us? And really, I never questioned my faith as much as I have in the last 6 years since we brought our boys home, of just that hopeless feeling and feeling so isolated and alone and just really craving just relationship with people and relationship with God. And then the other thing is so many friendships lost. We've realized very quickly that the mess in our home, quote unquote, is just a lot for people to walk into. And while some people are willing to show up in very surface level ways, the majority of people are unwilling to really come in and see what's happening in front of us. And so we have lost a lot of friendships because unfortunately we can't go to parties or we can't go to play dates or we can't have people over like we used to as much because really we have to prioritize the needs of our children and the safety of their hearts. And that has come very, very slow and steady with their ability to trust us and know that we are going to keep their interests in the forefront. And then I would say the biggest thing for me is I've had so many changes to my personality, a lot from the secondary trauma and compassion fatigue that comes from being a caregiver to children from trauma and also a caregiver for children with special needs. So like compassion fatigue is that emotional and physical exhaustion that really just diminishes your ability to empathize or feel compassion for others. And often people call it the negative cost of caring. That happens over time as the intensity of your need to caregive is happening without reprieve. And so I feel like from the day we met our boys, we have had to really jump in head first and really empathize and understand things that we never thought we could comprehend. And that hasn't gotten easier as they've gotten older. It's just gotten more intense in different ways. So that compassion fatigue. And then the secondary trauma is something that I never quite envisioned. And that is like the sudden development of our own PTSD symptoms that happen as a result of the trauma that you walk through with a child. And so for me, that's become significant sensitivity to sound. So really hard for me to be in groups of people or louder areas. Even in the day, I often wear noise canceling headphones in the day just to kind of drown out the world a little bit. Hypervigilance and anxiety in situations outside our home with our children. So really having to feel like I am the giver of their safety, no matter where we are and outside our home, my hypervigilance and anxiety can be even more heightened, just to make sure that obviously my kids are safe, but that other people are safe as well. And so, yeah, I've become a lot more introverted. I crave quiet more than ever. And then really just figuring out having to regulate myself very differently than I did pre-parenting, and just really allowing myself to be okay with letting a lot of things go in order to feel like our family is cared for well.
Just to lean into a few of those, do you feel like you have any support in this season to help stabilize some of those isolating feelings and all that you're facing?
Yeah, little by little, the support group that I founded and the organization that I founded has just been a wonderful, just breath of fresh air for me in that regard, because unless you're parenting children like this, a lot of people just don't understand the depth of challenge and the depth of difficulty that comes in every day. And so the families that we are in community with now since founding our organization has just been such a beautiful reprieve for our hearts to just feel seen in those moments, and just for them to understand the nature of what it's like to have so much trauma in your home constantly, while also feeling like there's this expectation from the outside world to be a certain type of parent. And so that dichotomy is really challenging to balance without somebody else anchoring you to the truth. And so our community has just been a really beautiful balance for us in that moment.
It is amazing to think of the power of community.
Yes, for sure.
And what about, are there counseling resources available?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say I tell parents in particular all the time that there's no right way to do this. It's every person is so different and every child is so different. And for me, I never envisioned myself needing a therapist. I felt like I was very well versed in my emotions and my ability to have coping strategies in place. And oh my goodness, realizing so quickly that having somebody objective to anchor you, to give you truth when it's really difficult to see, who's also not in the trenches with you, is really valuable. And so I highly recommend counseling for, obviously, for marriages, for couples, but also just for parents individually to work through your own trauma, your own insecurities, your own difficulties, so that you can actually be a better parent for your kids. And I think that's different for every person, but really important to find a therapist who can understand adoption and foster care, trauma, special needs, so that when you're sharing things about your children or you're sharing emotions about yourself in terms of a reaction to your child's behavior, that there's an empathy and an understanding there that doesn't come from every therapist who maybe doesn't have experience with those types of situations. So very encouraging to find someone that way. But I think that has been a beautiful part of my story, just in terms of really anchoring myself to truth weekly in the midst of feeling so much overwhelm at times.
I think that is so wise. It's always helpful to hear both sides. So now, will you share what have been some of the greatest gifts and rewards of parenting?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I say all the time that adoption is equal parts brokenness and beauty, and that's so true. So, you know, having so much intentionality in our parenting and having to really change the way we think about our lives. And it has just been so beautiful to see my kids begin to understand their worth, to realize that they don't need to feel shame for everything that they do or say, for them to verbalize safety in our home. And, you know, and when that happens, subsequently, they're able to share their hearts. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Hook, but the part where he kind of grabs his face and he's like, "There you are, Peter." That's how I feel with my kids all the time, of just these glimpses of the tenderness of their hearts and just the beautiful pieces and gifts and talents that God placed in them in their mother's wombs, that those come out little by little by little as you peel away all of these layers of the onion. And so just those pieces of them where you get to see their true personality and their true selves has just been worth just every minute of heartache for us, because I always want them to just be their best selves and whatever that looks like. And just seeing them create their own relationship with Jesus has been so beautiful. So that is for sure the icing on the cake. But, on my end of things, I think challenging myself to have really hard conversations around mental health, around race, around trauma and self-care has been such a great gift for me, because it's something that I never really thought about. And now I'm really having to dive deep, since I have, 2 Black children and 1 Chinese daughter. And that is something that I have to constantly think about and put myself into and make myself feel uncomfortable so that I can make them have more safety around their identity and who they are on the outside just as much as who they are on the inside. So I say all the time that anything we do for God will more than likely never be comfortable. And that is something that I've really embraced in the parenting of my children, but just really being able to see their little hearts shine.
That is such a mature way to live. And I want to go back. You had mentioned how powerful community has been. So can you think of what you would say is the most helpful thing that your community has done to support you and Paul and your family?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that we've ever wanted, that we still want to date, is really just having people sit with us. I think there's something so powerful about just being physically present with somebody in some of their darkest moments, and not trying to fix it or not trying to problem solve, but really just saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry and I'm here for you. That has been the most powerful times of our lives where we've really felt seen. And obviously, in terms of seasons of crisis, people bringing food or doing some tangible things are wonderful. But really, the thing that we need the most as a family is people just bearing witness to what's happening, even if it feels dark and heavy. So we've lost a lot of friends because we've had to hibernate with our kids as they heal and as we really allow them to feel safety. And so I think just people being willing to enter into that with you and really just sit with you has been the most powerful thing for our lives.
And I'm more hesitant to ask the flip side, but I do think it's important for us to learn, is there anything that's been the most harmful that your community maybe unintentionally did?
I don't know that I realized how difficult it would be for people to want to empathize with what we were going through. And really, that's what it's come down to, is people having kind of the same expectations of us post kids as they did pre kids. I think that's probably been the hardest thing. And the majority of people, for them, the story was in bringing our kids home. And then once we brought our kids home, it was like, oh, well, they're home and everything should be normal. They should just be able to jump in and, these kids are so blessed to have a family, and really realizing how convoluted that was, because as soon as our kids came home, it was like we started over again. That was when the real work started. And that's when we really had to change kind of everything we did in terms of our lives previously to acclimate that child to our family, but also attach to them and bond with them, since we've missed 4 years of their lives. And so I think that was probably the most hurtful thing, was just people really ostracizing us often for not being able to, show up to a party or come over for dinner, or just little things that I took so for granted, before bringing our kids home, that are just really challenging now as a family. And so I think a lot of that judgment and almost a little bit of condemnation came from people just being unwilling to understand our circumstances and why we couldn't do those things anymore, versus really trying to see what was happening inside the walls of our home and, sitting with us in those moments. So I think that has been the hardest part. And we really have lost a lot of friends in the process of this, just people who are not willing to sit in the mess. And so that was really hard to swallow, but also I think just really confirming for us of who are those people who are willing to see us like Jesus sees us.
Well, first, I'm so sorry just to hear the depths of the friendships being lost and people not being able to sit and be present what you feel like your soul is longing for, crying out for. And I just think here you and Paul are doing what you know you were called to do, and yet it came with all of this sacrifice. And I'm sure you would have loved to attend those dinner parties. So it was such a selfless act. And so then to heap condemnation on top of that, that's just hard.
Yeah, it was for sure. And something that, we still work through regularly and are much more cautious of, who we bring in to get to know our family, because it's heartbreaking for our kids too, So yeah, it's been a struggle, but also, like you said, we know that this is what we've been called to do, and we know that this is what God created us for. And so I think we've really had to rest in Him during those moments for sure.
Well, if you did have to narrow it down to a few of the most powerful lessons God's taught you through your parenting journey, what would you share?
He's always with us. Even when we feel He's the farthest away, He's right there with us. And I think that was something that in the beginning was so difficult for me to see. And then really realizing like we are the closest to the river when we're in the valley. It became more of a lament for me and just a sacred time with Him, where I realized He's not surprised by my anger and He's not surprised by my heartache. And it's okay to not have words. There's been so many nights where I've just played worship music and just wept because I felt like I couldn't utter one more word in prayer. I just felt like I had prayed everything. There was nothing left to pray. And just realizing like in those moments, He is there to comfort us and be with us. And I've really had to learn to trust Him day after day, even with no evidence of hope. And so I think those are the lessons that I hold on to, that even when I feel isolated and lonely from relationships in my community, that He is always there and He is never leaving us.
Wow, I've never heard that imagery before. And just thinking when we're on the mountaintop, we can gain perspective and we can see the river. We can see Him at work and see a little bit more of the picture, but absolutely being in the valley and being so near to Him. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Bettina, what is something that you're passionate to communicate to everyone, specifically as it relates to adoption or foster care?
Yeah, so I would say I have two really big points. First, to people who may know someone who's fostering or adopting or even has children with special needs. And that would just be that families need support, so much support. We as parents spend so much time investing hope, safety, healing into our children. And really, no one is doing that for the parents. And so I would say the parents need just as much care as the children they're caring for. And really, they just need people to bear witness to the beauty and the brokenness, as I mentioned earlier. So, friendships and relationships are what keep families afloat. And I really believe that while not everyone is called to foster or adopt, everyone is called to support that mission. And so I think one way to do that is to simply show up for these families and get to know them, get to know every member of the family, get to know what their needs are, what their fears are, what makes them tick, and really just allow each member of the family to feel cared for and supported in those times of crisis. So I would say that's one thing. And then the other side, for foster, adoptive, special needs families, I say all the time that it's okay to ask for help. It's so needed to ask for help. And it doesn't mean you're a failure. I think for the first few years that we had our boys, I felt like a terrible mom. I felt like I was failing at everything, and that even choosing something like a medicinal intervention would be me failing as a parent, and just realizing quickly that I am not meant to be their savior. I am not meant to be their healer. I'm meant to be their mom. And I think that I can love them unconditionally, but their healing and their ability to find who they are is going to come from God. letting a lot of those expectations go is so important. And then really just asking for help, constantly asking for help for the little things, for the big things. And I say that could be help from people or it could be help from doctors. Before, I really felt like putting my children on medication would be me failing because I couldn't meet their needs. And really, it's just that their brains and bodies are wired differently. And maybe that's exactly what they need in order to be able to access who they are. And so, I just really encourage families to let those expectations go of you feeling like you need to heal every part of your kids. Really let that go and really hand it over to Jesus, and then really just ask for help.
And I just want to spend a few more minutes really focusing on those parents who are in the trenches right now. And I think your specificity is maybe going to help stir some ideas for them as well. So for you, what keeps you encouraged and renewed or ready to face each day?
For me, that's always time with Jesus. I am not a morning person. I used to sleep in till, 10:30 before I had kids when I could. I just really, really crave just a slow morning. But with kiddos and even my own symptoms of secondary traumatic stress, I really needed alone time to feel like I'm ready for the day. So, I get up every morning at 4:15, 4:30. I spend time with Jesus, and that could be prayer, that could be worship, that could be just listening to like a Dwell Bible app or something where I can just listen to the word. That could be journaling, but really it's just a quiet, reverent time for me to feel like I can regroup, get my head on for the day, and really just kind of give all of my insecurities, my fears, my feelings of overwhelm for the day over to Jesus. So that's something I do Monday through Friday every morning just to kind of get myself ready for the day. Exercise is huge for me. I exercise 6 days a week religiously, and that's something that keeps me feeling like I can function and kind of, again, feel prepared for the day. Quality time with Paul is so, so important to me, and it doesn't come very often, but we are very intentional about that time. And that's something that keeps us connected and keeps me renewed and just feeling like I can be a wife just as much as I can be a mom, which I think is few and far between for those of us who have littles at home. And then really support groups with other families who understand. So we run a support group, but we also just spend time with other families who have other adopted children or special needs children, and just really have some solidarity and just communication around the struggles, but also the beauties of that. So those are all ways I keep myself encouraged and renewed. And then truthfully, I see a therapist every week, and I'm on an anti-anxiety medication, both of which I was so reluctant to do because, again, I really felt like I was failing as a human being. And I think really just that stigma around mental health was something I never really discussed growing up. And now I'm such a huge advocate for, because I really do feel like for me to be my best self, I really do need a little bit more assistance right now in these times of struggle. And I think that has been something that I've been so grateful to just feel freedom to do and not be judged or feel shamed about, but just really embrace that as part of my healing journey.
Just want to encourage you that I think it's even more courageous to not only recognize that, but then to follow up and do something about it. So I admire you so much. I appreciate that answer. And just thinking of that parent now, if they're feeling desperate and they just want another handle to grab onto, I think you've given some great ideas. Dwell is amazing. Obviously, time with the Lord is just necessity. And are there any other resources or practical applications that you would encourage them to try?
Yeah, I think some of that comes from, the point that they're feeling overwhelmed. So sometimes for me, it's really just a gauge. Like I have a 0 to 10 gauge, and I talk about this a lot in our support groups with our families, but just where are you in that realm of overwhelm or stress or compassion fatigue, and knowing kind of your early warning signs of where you are in that process so that you can ask for help or take a break. So for me, that's I love to cook and I love to bake, and that's something that like just fills me up. And so I know when I get to the point where I'm really having trouble meal planning for the week, like that just feels so overwhelming to me. I know that I'm really not in a great space and I'm headed towards an even worse space. And so that's like an early warning sign for me of something I know that I need to regroup on and figure out a way to do that. And so for a lot of parents, I would say really figure out where you are in that spectrum and write down your early warning signs and then write down the things that you know help. So like for me, I take a hot shower every evening after I put my kids down because sometimes it just helps me like wash the day away. And it was actually something that my son's trauma therapist recommended to me years ago. And I was like, oh, that sounds awful. And now it's something I do every single night. And it really helps me regroup. I really do feel like it's a reset for the evening so that I can actually be present for time with my husband or present for just other things I want to get done in the evening. And so that's something that has been hugely helpful for me to just feel like I'm kind of starting fresh once the kids are in bed and can just regroup for myself. And then, a few other things that come with that are just little pieces of the day. Like for me, I love lighting candles in the evening or in the morning. That could be taking breaks in the day. So I regularly set breaks in the day for the kids and for myself so that I can just come in my room and regroup for a few minutes so that I can stay recharged and refreshed. But I think if you as a parent are feeling overwhelmed in your confidence or ability to parent your children, there's so many books and resources. The Karyn Purvis Institute is huge, the Connected Child, the Connected Parent, just other really beautiful resources that you can go to figure out ways to better understand the needs of your children and really feel like you can be confident in parenting them moving forward.
Thank you for giving such practical applications. And now, will you just tell us a little bit more about your nonprofit and direct us where we can find you online?
Yeah, of course. So in 2018, we launched Reclaimed Hope Initiative, and the name came just from, as I mentioned before, just walking with so many families who just kept saying, I feel so hopeless. I feel so hopeless. I feel so hopeless. And we have been there as well, and just really feeling that lack of hope in our parenting journey. And so we decided, like, how can we help people reclaim their hope? And so we launched Reclaimed Hope Initiative really as just a support group for families. And we started with about 6, and in 9 months, we had more than quadrupled in size. And families just kept bringing more families. And so since then, we've launched all sorts of programming. But, essentially, we walk families through IEPs, navigation for schools, specifically for trauma competent care in schools and how to really advocate for your child's needs. We help families navigate Medicaid waivers. So if you have a child with special needs, how to get your child on the waiver, how to fill out the paperwork. We do meal deliveries, therapeutic counseling for parents. We do a trauma camp for children called Camp Hope. So any youth with a traumatic past who can't access a regular summer camp is able to come to our camp with some trauma competent caregivers in place and just the ability for them to feel like they can be a kid. We also do respite care, and then we train and hire caregivers to pair with families who are able to manage a range of trauma needs all the way to special needs. And it's just been something that was very unexpected. I say all the time, I very selfishly started our support groups because Paul and I needed support. And it has just been a beautiful fruition of God's calling, of our adoption, of our ability to parent. Paul and I are also licensed foster parents. And so just the foster care journey and just supporting families through those periods of time, it has been so beautiful and something that I'm now doing full time in addition to caring for my kids. And so I'm just so grateful that A, God planted the seed so long ago, but B, that he's really given me the capacity to care for others like I needed to be cared for in those moments of darkness.
This nonprofit just sounds absolutely amazing. And I think it's a great first place for people to go and learn a little bit more, see if it can be helpful for their journey. So could you give us the website one more time, and we'll link to it in the show notes?
Yeah, of course. It's just reclaimedhopeinitiative.org. And then you can also find us on Instagram or Facebook at Reclaimed Hope Initiative.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And you know that we're called the Savvy Sauce because savvy is synonymous with practical knowledge. And so as my final question for you today, Bettina, what is your savvy sauce?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's to never stop being intentional about your dreams. I think that there is such a beauty around the gifts and talents that God gave us in our mother's womb as you were little, as you got older. And I know for me, the weekends that I can get away either by myself or with Paul and just spend time dreaming about the gifts God has given me and how I want to utilize them, or for our organization or for my family, those are the times that I feel most like myself, that I feel the most refreshed, that I feel so close to God. And I think even in really difficult seasons, it's so important to never stop dreaming. So I would say be intentional about your dreams, set aside time, and really just trust that God has a beautiful story that He's writing even in the midst of hardship.
Your faithful obedience to God just radiates from you, and you worship Him by the way you live your life. So thank you for letting us in on your journey today, and thank you for being my guest.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Laura. I appreciate it.
One more thing before you go. Have you heard the term gospel before? It simply means good news, and I want to share the best news with you. But it starts with the bad news. Every single one of us were born sinners, but Christ desires to rescue us from our sin, which is something we cannot do for ourselves. This means there's absolutely no chance we can make it to heaven on our own. So for you and for me, it means we deserve death and we can never pay back the sacrifice we owe to be saved. We need a Savior. But God loved us so much, He made a way for His only Son to willingly die in our place as the perfect substitute. This gives us hope of life forever in right relationship with Him. That is good news. Jesus lived the perfect life we could never live and died in our place for our sin. This was God's plan to make a way to reconcile with us so that God can look at us and see Jesus. We can be covered and justified through the work Jesus finished if we choose to receive what He has done for us. Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. So would you pray with me now? Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to take our place. I pray someone today, right now, is touched and chooses to turn their life over to you. Will you clearly guide them and help them take their next step in faith to declare you as Lord of their life? We trust you to work and change lives now for eternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you are declaring Him for me, so me for Him. You get the opportunity to live your life for Him. And at this podcast, we're called the Savvy Sauce for a reason. We want to give you practical tools to implement the knowledge you have learned. So you ready to get started? First, tell someone. Say it out loud. Get a Bible. The first day I made this decision, my parents took me to Barnes & Noble and let me choose my own Bible. I selected the Quest NIV Bible and I love it. You can start by reading the book of John. Also, get connected locally, which just means tell someone who's a part of a church in your community that you made a decision to follow Christ. I'm assuming they will be thrilled to talk with you about further steps, such as going to church and getting connected to other believers to encourage you. We want to celebrate with you too, so feel free to leave a comment for us here if you did make a decision to follow Christ. We also have show notes included where you can read scripture that describes this process. And finally, be encouraged. Luke 15:10 says, "In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The heavens are praising with you for your decision today. And if you've already received this good news, I pray you have someone to share it with. You are loved, and I look forward to meeting you here next time.